everyone, welcome to Mindful Adventures. So something that I've noticed in these circles, and what I mean by circles are the spiritual circles, regardless of whatever faith you're in or your method or practice, or even just, your curiosity and stepping into things of spiritual nature, is that there's a tendency to gravitate towards the feel goody-goody type, spiritual stuff. You see the tapestry in the background, you got the mala beads, the Om Shanti Shanti vibes, all of that stuff. And while it is nice, and while there's great value and meaning in those experiences and the appearance of spirituality in so many different ways, oftentimes just, seeking after that really prevents a person from coming to something that is more existential, more real than something that is just on the surface. And so, I know that there's a lot of questions out there. I see people ask questions all the time to others, and I've even received questions like this myself on, well, how do I manifest positive things in my life? How can I manifest consciousness? How can I, have better relationships? How can I manifest love in my life? How can I build the character that's needed for more spirituality and freedom and the reduction of suffering? But you see, the thing is, all of these questions really boil down to one question. And I think that this one question is something that is always avoided, and the mind will try to avoid it to the very end. As a matter of fact, in my experience, it's the only real question in existence. There's no other question that is real. And what I mean by real, the realness of it, is really just getting to the heart of the matter, right? So when somebody asks, what is the right way to, what's the best way to be free from addiction or free from lust, or what's the best way to manifest love in my life? How can I manifest more wealth and freedom in my life? Well, see, all of that boils down to, it's because all of the desires and all of the ideas of what we think we are moving towards and what we hope we are going to achieve one day, all of those things, whether in word and thought, imagination, whatever it may be, is just an extension and a reflection of oneself. So the only real question, and this is always the question of the mindful adventure, is what is the self in relationship to those things? So I am open to all questions. Don't get me wrong. You can ask me anything, and I'm open and receptive to it. But I'll always bring it back to this one root question. And so, and this is a question that's avoided. This is a question that I'd say most people on the planet will postpone until later on in life. And actually, maybe people don't even ask this. They wait until they're about to die, or that there's some sort of real danger of death and challenge to one's existence to really get to the existential, really get to what is real, right? And so, there's a story that I want to share with you that I haven't shared with anyone ever before. And I think that, if you stick around to the end of this adventure, because like with every adventure, you don't just dip out early. You don't, have your attention divided into 1,000,001 places. You give the adventure undivided attention, because that's the only way to really fully experience anything, is with this sort of attentiveness. And so I just ask that you give me your undivided attention for just a few moments. I have no idea how long it's going to take. I just, started recording, and I don't know what may come up. I don't know how long this is going to be. I know that if this is going to be on Instagram, people are already flipping through stories, and, we like this generation is so fast food oriented. Our minds cannot sit. We can't sit with something without the attention being diverted elsewhere. But as a part of the practice, and we can consider this today a part of your mindful practice, is to be fully attentive to whatever it is that you're doing. Even after this, if you're eating, to give it your total attention to eating. What is eating? To really know what eating is beyond, flavor and sensation. To really know what drinking is. To really know what sharing and connecting with others and doing work and all of those things, all of the different expressions of ourselves and all of the different areas of our lives can really be witnessed and experienced in its totality, and in that, great realizations and insights can come to the surface. So The story that I want to share with you is something that I think those of you who know me know that my father passed away almost 3 years ago. He had a stroke 6 years back, and then he started to recover, but after some time, he ended up having another stroke, followed by a third stroke, and the third one is what really, in a way, just kind of knocked him out. You know, I remember seeing him for the very last time. I flew from Israel back to Atlanta to visit my family and see him just, there, almost in a state of paralysis. It appeared to be a state of paralysis because he couldn't move. He could blink his eyes to communicate, but my father, he was really my heart and my best friend, and who I consider to be my first teacher, my first master in the master-disciple relationship that some of you may have heard of. And but anyways, I digress. So almost 3 years ago, this July, he passed away, and it was in his request that he would be cremated. So through my upbringing, I've had various different feelings and opinions on cremation versus burial. For the longest, I'm like, hey, just put him in the ground. Burial is the way to go. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, all of that. Just quoting all of the things that I had learned before through other religions, and especially in the Christian tradition. Got to be buried. It's you got to be in the ground. But then eventually, I started to open up a little bit to other possibilities, like cremation, and over time, it's where I am now is that. Since we are something that is beyond the form itself, how the form is decomposing and how it is destroyed in a sense, in my opinion, I find to be irrelevant. But it was his request, and I had the great honor of honoring that request. And what I mean by that is, as my mother and I are filling out the paperwork and going through, I think my sister was there as well, we were going through all the paperwork of, okay, so this is when the funeral will be, and this is what the program looks like, and this is what the cost will be. And then there came a point in the paperwork where the funeral director says, well, he did request to be cremated, so would you like to, handle the cremation? So now this was the first time. I actually had no idea that it was a possibility to participate in something like this. I was like, say what? And my mom, she immediately understood, and she says, oh, no, I'm good. And I said, oh, yes, I think I would like to be a part of that, both my sister and I. The great honor of honoring what his wish was to be done with the physical body, and of course all of the grief and the sadness that can come along with that. There was also a sense of joy, a sense of excitement, of curiosity, of wondering, okay, so what is this like? This is what this is what his wishes were. To be done with his body. What does that look like? I don't even know if I want to know what it looks like. All sorts of questions were going through my head. But my sister and I went ahead and went with it. And so on that day, when we walked into the room, they had him on a table, and there was a box, and the box was open. We could look inside and see him and say a few last words. At that point, I felt like there was really not much else to say, but there's always more that comes up. Any of you who have lost someone who's close to you, I'm sure you can relate that no matter how good that last time was in seeing them and communicating and bonding, that just what if there's just that one more thing, one more conversation that we wish could be had. But as we're sitting there and we're looking at him and saying a few things and thanking him for his very existence and his presence in our lives, there came a point where after all of that was said and done, it was time to push him in the fire, so to speak. And so we start the process. The machine is ready. We start the button, push the button in order to heat up the chamber, and all of the flames just, you could hear the flames starting to really grow stronger and stronger within this chamber. And then there came the moment where we had to just send him in. So I said, all right, Daddy, here you go. Push him in the fire. And wow, I mean, he was my best friend. The love is really indescribable, what we shared, and all of the great treasures that he shared with me along the way. All of that, just watching him just go into the fire, and wow, even now, just getting the chills thinking about it. And so he goes in, and the little door shuts down, and there's a small window, and all you can see is just the glow of the flames, the fire, the smoke, the whole mess of it all, just boom, right there in the chamber. And in that moment, something happened. And I don't really have any other way to describe it, so this is the best that I have for now. But in that moment, I was just like flooded with emotion, flooded with memories, and the emotions around those memories of, oh wow, he taught me photography, and he was such a teacher and a master. He taught me the mysteries, and he taught me magic, and he taught me just religion and everything. There was so much that he had invested in me, and then along with that was who I knew him to be as a person, beyond the things that I received from him, but just who he was to me as he appeared in my life. And in sitting there, something clicked. I'm looking at the fire, and I'm looking, and I say, okay, this is strange. Something very strange about this is that he was, I've always seen him in a solid form, but now all I see is flames and gas. So okay. Now let me see. He's not here. He's in there, but and I'm saying to myself, he's not here. He's in this chamber. And let's see, what else can I see about him? Where is he now? I'm thinking, okay, so what about the alcoholism? He was an alcoholic and a drug addict for quite some time. Thank God, he ended up giving up some of those things. But I looked and I said, okay, well, I don't really see the alcoholic in him now. I can't really pinpoint that part of who I remember him to be. I don't really see that. I can't pinpoint it. I'm looking, and I'm thinking about how much he invested in me, him being a photographer and him being an artist, and all the beautiful art that he created. And in that moment, I'm looking, and I said, okay, well, wow, he was an artist, he was a photographer. Interesting. I don't see it. I don't see the photographer in him. I wanted to cling to something so bad. I wanted to say, okay, my father is in this chamber, and I love him so much, and he's my best friend, and I miss him already, and I'm looking for him and seeking and saying, okay, where is he? So okay, oh, that's okay. Well, what about the he was a painter, he was African American. Okay, let me see. Is the African here? I didn't see the African. I'm looking at the flames. I don't see the American. There was no American that was in that smoke. There was nothing but flames and ashes. Okay. He was a Democrat, but there's no Democrat, what I see, in that moment. There was no Democrat that was there. There was just flames and ashes. Then I said, okay, well, he was a hellraiser sometimes. He used to raise hell and cause a lot of suffering, for my mother and I. And even though we forgave him, he was a hellraiser. I'm trying to find out, okay, so where's the hellraiser that I used to know, that I saw once before? Is he there? No, no hellraiser. Just flames and ashes. Sounds like hell, but it's not really. It's just flames and ashes. Still watching. So, okay. I'm still looking. And meanwhile, the sadness, the tears, the feeling of being in a dream, feeling like, this always seemed to be my worst nightmare. Of course, I think many can relate. When you lose somebody, it seems like it's your worst nightmare coming true. And I was, pinching myself, like, okay, no, this is just it's such a dream. But it was so real, But I think this is some of the things that we tell ourselves in a way to cope and to comfort and to try and fit our heads around the loss and the experience of that loss. And still sitting there, I'm looking, and I say, okay, so he was a magician. I'm looking, I say, okay, where's the magic? Where's the magician? And because he was the magician that I used to know him to be, all different types of magic, he was a master of it, I would look and say, okay, where's the magician? Now, since he knew the magic, I said, well, surely, maybe I'll see something. Maybe there would be like a little, cloud that will come through the window, and I'll get to see some sort of confirmation, him reassuring me that yes, there's something beyond the physical, that yes, all of those things that I shared with you about God and religion and the soul and mysticism and the magic of life, that all of that you'll be able to see, and it'll be settled right then and there. No, none of it. Nothing came. So I was looking, and I didn't see the magic. I didn't see the magician. I didn't see the Democrat. I didn't see the African American. I didn't see the drunk. I didn't see the hellraiser. And even though he was also a heaven raiser, I didn't see that. But meanwhile, my mind is just being flooded with all of these different things, all of these various memories, and all of the different perceptions of who he was throughout the time, throughout all of those years that we were in each other's lives. That no, none of that was there. And so then my sister and I walked out. We left, and it was still kind of, burning within me. The flames that I saw, that glow through the small window of this chamber, I'd have to say it was the most beautiful sunset that I've ever witnessed in my life. The most beautiful thing that I've ever witnessed were these flames. Till this day. Doesn't mean that there won't be more beautiful things. I'm sure there's going to be more and more beauty and more sunrises and sunsets to witness, but out of all of the experiences of my life, even greater than the satoris that I've experienced, the complete stoppage and the cessation of thought, that witnessing the impermanence of his body in real time was the most beautiful thing that I've ever witnessed. And yet I was still troubled, and I went home. And actually, before I left, I had already said, okay, well, maybe I'll do something with the ashes. Maybe take a little bit of his ashes. We'll get his fingerprints, and see if we can put that on something. And so I ended up getting, actually, let me show you. I ended up getting this right here. So let me get a little bit of bling with his fingerprint. That's the least I can do, right? Because, look, he's not in any of the ideas of what I thought he was. I didn't really see that in the end. But maybe this is something that I can keep. And so I remember when they gave this to me, and I realized, I said, oh wow, this is so funny, so strange, so morbidly hilarious that he's not in this, but yet the meaning, what it means to me, is something that is so real to me, is so so present when I think of it, so present when I touch it and when I hold this and what it represents. This little bit that is left of the man that invested so much of his life in others and myself. And so once I got this, then that's when it really hit me that in the moment of witnessing the destruction of the body, in the moment of witnessing the various states of that destruction, that I had to be forced to admit something that was terrifying and liberating at the same time. And in that moment, I was forced to admit that where he was in my mind. That everything that I had described, everything that I had attributed to all of the characteristics that I had projected on his form, well, I no longer had the form as a frame of reference. And the moment when I was standing before that chamber, looking at the flames, the window, there was no other frame of reference than mine. So then the question is now, so then where is he now? Okay, mind. Carry the memories and carry the love and the joy and the experience with me. But all of that is carried in mind. It doesn't reduce the beauty of it. Just please understand, it doesn't reduce the beauty. Actually, one can come to see the absolute miraculousness of existence. That when form is not there, mind is still there to inform that which is not even present. And so, what was there? The simple nature of it all? What was he in that moment as I was witnessing the destruction of the body? I was witnessing mind, and I was witnessing the fire. There was nothing. Who he wasn't even there anymore. It was just fire, just flames. You know? Just simple. Flames. That's it. Fire. Ashes. And who he was before. What did I think about him before that? Maybe that was also mind. Of course, it doesn't necessarily reduce, again, the miraculousness of the being. But if who I thought he was afterwards was mind, and who he was before was mind, and in that moment of witnessing the destruction of the body, the rapid destruction of the body in that process from state to state, I saw, okay, there's nothing here but flames and ashes. And now the ashes are in silver. Is he there? No. Maybe in mind. And that's okay. That's one of the beauties of existence, is that mind appears, that being appears, non-being, all of the different terminology and all of that stuff. You know, sometimes I just wish we could just cut through the shit and get to the realness, you know? So much terminology, so many concepts and things and constructs and this and that, but of course that's okay, because this is how one can exchange ideas and communicate. But think, what is existential? What is the real question, you see? Is my entire conceptualization, my ideation of myself true? Is the conceptualization or the ideation of others and who we think, or what the mind perceives others to be, is that true? Is that actually real? And so one has to allow themselves, really give oneself permission to get to the root, to ask real questions, to be willing and to be open enough to get to the realness of one's existence, to get to the realness, the burning question, really the burning question that is decorated with so many other questions. How can I make more money? How can I find love? How can I have better sex? How can I be more spiritual? How can I live a free, whole, and complete existence? All of these questions are just permutations of one question, because all of those things are in relationship to oneself. What is the I that perceives? What is the I that has been taken to be body-mind? What is the I that witnesses death? What is the I that witnesses life? What is the self? And so I have a great appreciation for real questions, dealing with the real situation, you know? And I get questions all the time. People have asked me outside of the context of the mindful adventure, even though really the mindful adventure is all is included, at least to me. But people ask me, "Oh, what is it like to be, a black man in Israel?" Well, what do you think it's like? What are your ideas of what black means? What are your conceptualizations of Israel? What are your projections of being black gay and in Israel? What are your perceptions of that? You tell me what you think it means. It's meaningless, the foolishness of the question. Just stupidities. Really. We some of this stuff can be, fun intellectually and we make small talk, but there's so much more. There's so much more beyond that. There's so much more beyond, and even the things on, manifestation, manifesting one's consciousness. There's so many beings on the planet who have this desire to be awakened, for spiritual awakening and for enlightenment. But nobody is even getting to the crux of the issue here is, what is the I that perceives that they are asleep? This, if you get to this, if you really get to this, then maybe your initial question is no longer relevant. What is the I that wants to manifest X, Y, and Z? What is the I that wants to resist that which is not in the current manifestation? What is the I that is a manifestation in and of itself? As what is this I? As what am I? What am I living? So yesterday I received a question from somebody in Georgia. She chooses to remain anonymous, but I can just share some insights into the question, and I think this is something that we can explore together on the Mindful Adventure. And so her question, I don't have it written out, but it goes something like this: is she asks, hopefully she's watching, the question is, well, what is death? And then she followed it up with, well, I've heard of something called a dying before you die. What does it mean to die before one dies? This kind of has the ring of awakening of truth. So what is it? And it was tasty. I love questions like that. I'm like, oh, it just has the aroma, the fragrance of awakening, the way that she had asked it. And so this is the thing here. Now, before we can figure out what is death, one has to ask, what is life? What is your life? As what are you living? Okay? Because there's an idea here, and naturally the fear arises in beings everywhere. We all have experienced the fear of death, but there naturally arises that fear in, okay, maybe especially now during COVID, we see the suffering that's taking place on a global scale, and also injustices that are coming to light, and just the suffering that that's really, it's really sad to watch. You can have compassion for those who are in suffering, and also become aware of one's own personal suffering. But in that, of course, we see that there's much more that we all have in common across the world than what appears in the surface. And so, what is life? Are you living? Are you living? And if you are, which you're listening, and if you're breathing and you're here, then as what are you living? Because we got to keep in mind that, I'm sure we've heard in, it's a proverb or the Lord's Prayer, we don't walk in the valley of death. So the question, what is death, assumes that this is the valley of death, and we're not in the valley of death. No. We're in the valley of the shadows of death. And the fear arises in coming to that tragic realization, one that can be so liberating, but we push off until something that we call death, we label as death, when the body drops. But coming to the realization that we are nothing but shadows. Coming to the realization that the shadows that we have taken ourselves to be, the labels of being Democrat or Republican, of being right-wing or left-wing, the labels of being black and whatever that means, or being white and whatever the hell that means, and being spiritual or physical or material or intelligent and dignified or political, and all of the other garbage nonsense terminology that that we use to fixate our identities and our egos upon, that coming to the realization that those are nothing but shadows, and that the true self is hidden underneath it all. And so, for those of you of Judeo-Christian persuasion, this is what it means to drop the fig leaves that were acquired in the Garden of Eden, right? To let go of all of the false knowledge that we decorate ourselves in, the false pretense, the notions of these things, and the narratives and the stories that we tell ourselves about our beings. Whether the labels and the descriptions and the mental constructs and the conceptualizations and the ideas and the story were passed down or not, you are here. As what are you here? As the individual, not a crowd, not a society, not something else, but let's just deal with you, the individual, right? Taking the responsibility for one's own awareness to turn inwards and see, okay, now which of these fig leaves do not fit? Which of these fig leaves are covering up the nakedness of us all? Which of these notions and shadows, the echoes, right? The echoes of a mind that is lost in the perceptions of its own matrix. What are these echoes, and what are these shadows, and what are these fig leaves that I've been decorating myself with my entire life? And this is the question. This is the question that brings fear to so many, and this is the question that, actually this is the realization that many are afraid of discovering, and so, and postponing, and saying, okay, well, no, well, all of that's going to happen at death. But even the thought of death, it's like, okay, let's not talk about it because, we don't want to die yet. Well, first we have to make sure that that which we think will die exists in the first place. And I encourage you to not, you don't have to postpone. There's no need to postpone. There's nothing wrong with postponing. And there's nothing wrong, I know that I've said a lot about the concepts and the names and the descriptions and all of these different mental constructs that have been used and passed down throughout time, and the ones that we create and feed our own stories into. But I don't mean, when I talk about that, I don't mean that it's wrong. I don't mean that it's immoral. I don't mean that it's something that doesn't have value, because of course, in our communication and exchange of ideas, we need language, and we can use the language constructively to come to great insights in the moment. But when one is alone, and to oneself. And when one is especially going into the journey of the heart, there will come a point where this question can arise as to what is behind even the one who's on the journey. What is behind the notion of a spiritual self? What is behind the notion of an awakened or an unawakened or an enlightened or an unenlightened being? What is the one, who is the one that is trying to navigate this dualistic world towards an idea, their own idea of what duality and non-duality is? And in bringing one's loving attention, not only to the real existential question, but to all of the expressions of oneself, all of the fig leaves that we've used to cover, not to just say, okay, well, and also this is something that we see in these circles is, okay, well, I'm not the body, and I'm not the emotions, and I'm not the mind, and I'm not my suffering, and I'm not this. It's not about escape avoidance either. It's being total in one's seeing, right? Being total. And before the transparency, before one can even discuss anything about being transparent in this world, transparent as consciousness, transparent as the being shines and emanates from being to every other being, before that can even come to be a matter of discussion, it all begins with honesty. And that honesty happens through the process of inquiry. It is not actually even a process in this moment, in this instant, you see. Every moment, every instant declares the truth of one's being, and we can always choose to postpone. It's okay. Actually, I'm really good at procrastinating. It's something that I've come to accept and bring into the loving light of awareness in my journey in knowing the self, that the self also has space for that. The self has room. You see, the one self has room. Even though there's only, one is enough, there's room for 7 billion. Even though, postponing, it's okay, there's room for discovery here, now, and today. For those of you whose heart is pulled in that direction, follow it with your whole heart. So in order to really understand what it means to die before one dies, depends on the questioner as to whether there's a willingness, a real desire and a willingness to take the inquiry to the very end. If there's a willingness to see oneself beyond one's own self-adopted and self-maintained notions of identification, and if there's a willingness to make a sacrifice, and that sacrifice may be all of the borrowed knowledge, all of the benefits that come along with this body, mind, ego identification and the labeling and all of those things, if there's a willingness to sacrifice that, then maybe in that willingness and that openness, the heart can open to a much more profound possibility, one that isn't just localized in form, and one that isn't global according to the concepts and the labels of crowds and societies, but something that is much more cosmic, much more universal in its expression as consciousness and as the beings that we are today. So may all beings come to the true realization and the understanding of oneself and abide in that peace. It's here now and open and available to you. You won't find it in me, you won't find it in others, and you definitely won't find it in a book. All of this stuff is really just the treasure chest that's in your hands, and it's it's yours. Just what will you see? What sacrifice will be made to come to that realization? Namaste.